What's up? It's Wills. Today in the Miata build, we're finally gonna do the first startup. So there's a few things I gotta do before I start it up. So let's go ahead and get started. First up, I'm gonna go ahead and do an oil change. And for the oil change, I'm gonna use this Rotella T6 540. A lot of people recommended it on the forums, and a lot of people with Turbo Miatas use the same oil. So hopefully it'll be good. I'm also gonna change out the oil filter. This is the oil filter I got. It's a little bit bigger than the standard Miata oil filter. Here's the part number. This is the same thing that Flying Miata uses and sells on their site. I'll go ahead and leave a link in the description below. So let's go ahead and get started. We're gonna go ahead and take off the oil drain, 17 millimeter. All right, next up, let's go ahead and get off the oil filter. It's right here under the intake, next to the alternator. So you can access it by getting your hand under the intake. You can also get to it if you have the front right wheel off, right there next to the starter. Also put down some rags right under the oil filter, just so I can catch any drips. So while it's draining, I'm going to take some of the oil that I used for the last oil change, go ahead and rinse out the pan a little bit. All right, next up, we're going to go ahead and prime the oil filter. Then while we're doing that, go ahead and lube up the sealing surface. All right, now that our oil filter is primed, let's go ahead and get it up on the filter housing. And you just want to go ahead and get it hand tight. So next up, we're going to go ahead and install a new oil drain bolt. This one is magnetic, so hopefully it'll catch any metal if it ends up in the oil. I got this off Amazon. Go ahead and leave a link in the description below, and it's a direct replacement for the OEM Mazda plug. It also comes with a couple of copper crush washers. We're going to replace those two while doing the oil change. So time to go ahead and put in the oil. For oil, I'm going to be running Rotella T6 540. I read a lot of good stuff about this on the forums. A lot of people with turbo builds use this oil, so it must be good. If you have a 1.8 Miata, it takes 4 quarts or 1 gallon or 3.7 liters if you're changing the oil filter as well. If you're not changing the oil filter, it's 3.8 quarts. All right, next up, let's go ahead and get coolant filled up. For now, I'm just going to be using distilled water. I'm going to end up flushing the radiator again before I end up putting coolant in it. But for now, I'm just going to run water since I'm going to drain this out anyways. Alright, so I got a new battery. It's been sitting on the charger to make sure it's fully charged, and now it's ready to go back into the car. Alright, let's go ahead and get this charger on so I can keep it charged while we start it up. Alright, next up, let's get the battery vent tube on. Alright, so before we put the battery in, I'm going to go ahead and use some of this dielectric grease. This is safe for electrical connections and it should prevent corrosion. So I'm going to put it on to the terminals before I put the battery in. Alright, next up we're going to go ahead and hook up the timing light. There's a few places you can hook it up to draw a 12 volt. If you go onto the driver's side, there is this little blue plug. You can pull 12 volt from there, and you can also pull 12 volt right here, which is the power for the alternator. For me, I'm going to go ahead and pull 12 volt from the alternator. And then for the ground, it's going to ground it straight to the throttle body. And the next thing, we're going to go ahead and put this induction clamp on top of cylinder 1. Alright, to check the timing, we're going to go ahead and jump TN right there and G and D. This will put the car into diagnostic mode and it'll keep the ignition timing stable. That way we can make sure that our basic ignition timing is set right. Alright, just like that, I made a jumper with the cable. You can also use a paper clip or just some kind of metal wire. But yeah, those are the two you want to jump, G and D and TN. Alright, so before we go ahead and start it up, I'm going to pull the fuel injector fuse, which is right here. That way we can make sure we have oil pressure before we try to start it up. Alright, so here's the fuel injector relay. Looks like there's also a fuse, which is this one. I think just pulling the relay will be fine. Just pop that out. Make sure no fuel is going in. We can check for oil pressure. Alright, next up we're going to go ahead and take off the oil feed for the turbo. And we're going to go ahead and put this line into a water bottle.
Nothing yet. Nothing yet. There you go. Yep. It just started. Yep. Alright, you're good.
Alright, now that we verified that the oil is going to the turbo, we're going to go ahead and put the oil feed line back on. Alright, now that the line is full of oil and we verified that oil is coming out, we're going to go ahead and keep cranking it so we can go ahead and prime the turbo. Alright, so you can see we got oil pressure. We should be ready for the first startup. Alright, then we're going to go ahead and take the fuses back in. Make sure the car is off. We're doing this. Alright, here we go. First startup. It's hella advanced.
You didn't short the connector.
I did.
Oh, you did?
Alright, so AFRs are reading pretty high, 15. I'd like to see it more at like 14. But it's idling. The optic is pretty bad. Hopefully once more oil gets in there, it'll quiet down once it gets up to 10. And also, you can see that my timing is like way off. Alright, so it's idling a little bit better now that it's warmed up. We're about 14. Alright, so now we're checking the timing. You can see it's way off. what we gotta do is rotate the cast and get the first mark down to the 10-degree mark. We're gonna go ahead and adjust the cast. Got my boy adjusting the cast here. Got the timing pretty much where I wanted it here. I'm here at the Trigger Wizard in Tutor Studio, and we pretty much just adjusted this until the 10-degree advance matched with the mechanical 10 degrees of advance. So I think we should be good with the Mega Squirt. Now that we got the ignition timing on Mega Squirt lined up with the mechanical ignition timing, we're gonna go here to the ignition options and go back to use table. Then we're gonna burn to the ECU and close. All right, so it's the next day. We got the car up and running and a few things set up on the Mega Squirt. Next up, we're gonna go ahead and start the car up again, warm it up, and we're gonna drain all the water that's in there, and we're gonna replace it with coolant. So this is the coolant I got. It should be good for Mazdas, so it should be fine for the Miata. Let's go ahead and start it up and get the water drained. So the 1.8 Miatas take about 1.5 gallons or 6 quarts of coolant. I'm also gonna add some of this Royal Purple Ice. I've heard a lot of good things about this online. Hopefully this will help keep temps down, especially since the car is turbo. It says to add 1 to 2 ounces per quart. So the Miata takes about 6. I'm just gonna add half the bottle. Keep the other half in case I ever need to flush the coolant again. Also, when draining the coolant from a Miata, good idea if you can to remove the lower radiator hose. Apparently a good amount of coolant can sit up inside here. Let's get it off. All right, now we're gonna go ahead and start the car, and we're just gonna go ahead and let it idle until all the bubbles come out of the cooling system. Now the fan switched on, thermostat should be open. Gonna run it for maybe another 5 minutes. If I don't see any bubbles, we should be good. Alright, the cooling system's all bled. Filled up the reservoir, and the extra amount from the funnel I dumped into there as well. Alright, so that's all for the first startup. Pretty happy, it's idling pretty good. We got fresh oil in there, timing is set, cooling system flushed and bled. So that's all for this episode. Hope you enjoyed it or found it helpful. If you did, go and give it a like. If you want to keep following the build, subscribe. See you in the next one. Peace.